Welcome back. Saturday will mark 1 year since the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown. And all this week, we have been focusing on guns and efforts for greater gun control, especially when it comes to our kids' safety. That is also the focus of the Children's Defense Fund. They are out with a new report called Protect Children, Not Guns in 2013. And this week, I sat down with the group's executive director, Melanie Hartzog, to talk about it. When we talk about, as we approach the 1-year anniversary of the tragedy at Newtown, the way to try and captivate some of the attention that this issue held in the days after Newtown and the weeks after Newtown, I think your report does that by putting this in terms that many of us can relate to, and that is of children. And right on the cover of your report, titled "We Can Do Better," you say that the number of children and teens killed by guns in 1 year, it would fill 134 classrooms of 20 students each. That's just children and young people here. And I think sometimes when people think this problem's so insurmountable, they don't put it in that context. It wasn't just Newtown. Kids die every day in this country at the end of a gun.
That's right. And it's very unfortunate. Every 30 minutes, there's a child that's or a teenager who's injured or dies related to gun violence in this country. And it's tragic, and we need to do something to stop this violence.
And if I could, I attached some other numbers that your report talks about. And in the CDF report, you talk about that since 1963, 3 times more children and teens have died from guns on American soil than U.S. soldiers killed in action and in wars abroad. And it also says that children, teens in America, 17 times more likely to die from gun violence than their peers in 25 other high-income countries combined. So to put it in context, what we see playing out on urban, suburban, rural communities in this country, you can't find that in other places in the world here. It sadly is unique to this country.
That's true, and the disproportionality is very unique here as well. And so it's the leading cause of death among Black children and teenagers in this country.
Why do you think? We've done the polls, Melanie, that show that where the public sentiment was in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy in Newtown and now, and support has ebbed in terms of universal background checks, tighter restrictions, access to guns. Why do you think a year later it's harder than it was before Newtown to get meaningful legislation passed?
Well, I think at the national level, I think we've seen the power of the NRA, which has been extremely disappointing. And I think for us at the Children's Defense Fund, it doesn't stop there. We've got to continue our pressed effort to really push Congress to take action. But there's also a lot of movement we've seen at the state level, particularly in New York State, where here in our state, the governor's leadership passed the SAFE Act. In Connecticut, comprehensive reform has happened as well. So there's been a lot of movement at the state level. And we've also seen a lot of mobilization of parent organizations, re-energizing various groups like Mayors Against Illegal Handguns. So there's been a lot of traction, but I think you're right, there needs to be more. And we've also seen a couple of states slip back that we've been very, very focused on. Indiana, that passed a stand your ground law in 2012, which was very disappointing. We've seen other states like Arkansas pass carrying guns in schools, which is extremely dangerous. And part of what we've been trying to do, as you'll see in the report, is really talk about the truth about guns. And so, for instance, when you look at households that are gun-owning households, 40% of them with children in their homes leave those guns unlocked. And what that leads to is greater likelihood of homicides and accidental deaths. And so when we're able to put out information that really educates the general public about the truth about guns, that's how we're really able to stem this tide of constant pushback from groups like the NRA, where we can't get comprehensive reform passed in D.C.
I saw, and many other people at home, we spoke about this week, there was one other gun tragedy of many that stood out, which was a 3-year-old child got access to a gun that obviously was unsecured in the home, and tragically had the gun go off and lost the child's life. And it spoke to a couple of things that I saw in the report that you spoke about. One is, educating, where right now neither doctors or teachers can actually even broach the subject of guns and the inherent dangers because they're precluded from doing so. And the other thing is accessibility. We've talked about the idea of smart guns or making it criminal if your guns aren't secured. Those are things that don't respect the right of a gun owner to purchase a gun, but it does give you responsibilities if you own it, and also the idea of educating kids about some of the real consequences of guns if they are in the household. Those would be two things I know you talk about in the report that would make a material difference, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. As I said, you know, we've got close to 50% of households, gun-owning households with children in this country that leave their guns unlocked. And what that leads to is greater likelihood of accidental deaths and homicides of children. And so there's much more that we can do to really educate families about safe carrying, safe storage of guns. And here in New York State, in fact, as part of our SAFE Act, that's part of the strategy here, which we're very, very pleased with.
Finally, when it relates to children, we are in the holiday season here, and you know, sitting under Christmas trees and gifts are going to be stuff like Call of Duty and a multitude of video games that are shooter games. And forget about even if they have a label on it, you can't watch a program, whatever it is, without these commercials being in every break here and glamorizing what's going on. Is that just something that's there, you're not going to change it, or can that actually be changed, the marketability to children at least, of kind of a desensitizing of all this violence?
Well, there's two responses to that. The first is Children's Defense Fund. During October and the month of Children's Sabbath, we actually had a toy gun and a video game exchange that we asked families to bring in violent video games and toy guns in exchange to talk about what are all the strategies we can do as communities to really support our young people and think about gun violence intervention strategies. And it was actually successful. And I also think it goes back to my second point as public education as well. As a mother of 2 children and soon to be 3, I think trying to, as much as possible, you know, you're right, there's a lot that children see, very hyper-violence on TV and with toys, and trying to, and even if you don't purchase those items, your children are exposed to them, but having very honest conversations that are age appropriate for your children, mine are 3 and 5, about what that means to carry a gun, what the effects are, I think are really powerful. And you'll find that children actually absorb more than we know and think.
Well, the report from the Children's Defense Fund is titled Protect Children, Not Guns in 2013, and we have linked it to our site. Melanie Hartzog, I appreciate it, and have a nice holiday season for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Newtown 1 year later. When we come back from break here, we're going to bring a conversation, one of the most emotional, thought-provoking interviews we've had since the tragedy, from a father from Newtown. Stay with us.